Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution. My name's Mark, and I'm thoroughly enjoying going through these scriptures with you. I hope you find it simple and easy on the sounds of babbling lips of this hideous English language that we speak in the 21st century. We want to get the message of deliverance out there and make it simple and easy. My children have started watching these videos now, and so I want this to be easy for them. My eldest son started reading the scriptures one day because I've read every book on my shelf. Have you read this book? I handed him his BYNV. Have you handed this? No. Have you read this? No. He started reading it and said, I don't really understand it, Dad. I said, well, that's why I'm doing this, so that people can understand without the strain, without the pressure. There's enough pressure in life. There's enough attack in life. I want the knowledge of Scripture and the message of eternal deliverance to be easy. So, and it all comes down to behaviour, of course. Our worship is not going to a building anymore. Our worship is not sticking our hands up in the air and waving and crying out to the great horse, JSUS, and all this madness. Behaviour is worship. Worship is a behaviour, 24/7, 365. Worship, Yahushua said, my bride will worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit, the Ruach, and the truth. We have to perform it. It's behaviour. So last episode we talked about Yitzchak and how Eleazar, the servant, went and found him a spotless bride from his father's household. Pure bloodline, and the bloodline continued, and the pattern of marriage wasn't a big, you can have a banquet or a party, a barbecue, whatever, when you have a wedding. There's nothing wrong with that. But the whole pomp and ceremony and paganism involved is not necessary, So, marriage. He went into his mother's tent. He took Ribka into his mother's tent, and they consummated, and that's how marriage occurs. And we're still waiting for our consummation. We are begotten from above. We have down payment of the Ruach in our vessel, Yahushua's spirit in us. And we, ever since Sinai, have been betrothed to Yahushua. And that's why we celebrate at Shabuath each year the wedding vows that were given to us. That's our anniversary. Because we've been betrothed. It's been signed. The blood covenant. Remember, we don't have a signature anymore. It's a blood was shed. The blood was shed. Yahushua shed his blood to purchase his bride legally. He paid the bride price. The bride it was his bride to start with, but she was stolen from the enemy. Because how are we his? Because whoever you serve, whoever you behave, whoever you obey is who owns you. You do what your master says. So by Adam and Kuah doing what the serpent, what the dragon said, they became his. And then the plan of deliverance was put in place by Yahushua. And when he came, he purchased back his bride with his everlasting perfect blood. And no more bloodshed is required. Not from our willies, circumcision, not from animal sacrifices. We don't need the temples or the priests or anything like that. No tithes or offerings. We don't need any of it. I don't want your money. I don't want any of it. I've got a job. If you need money, go and get a job. But I study the scripture and that's all big whoop. We all study the scripture. Go and get a job if you want money. Who are you? In the 21st century, we don't need a priesthood, we don't need tithes, we don't need to cut up animals. Forget it. Go look after your family yourself. So that's how Yahushua is. You don't work, you don't eat. Now, today we're going on to we're continuing this pattern of marriage and the seeds of that marriage between Yitzchak and Ribka. Yitzchak and Ribka, yes, they had some sons. Let's go on. Esau and Yaakov. Esau and Yaakov, or Jacob and Esau, pronounced Esau and Yaakov. Now Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Ribka as his wife. Remember Yitzchak? He just got his wife, took her into his mother's tent, consummated, they're married. He was 40 years old when he took Ribka as his wife, and for 20 years she was barren. I didn't know that. She was barren for 20 years, unable to have children. And Yitzchak pleaded his desire to have children with Yahushua, and he finally answered his request. allowing Ribkah to fall pregnant. But after some time, she felt dreadful kicking and struggling in her stomach, causing her to worry. So Ribkah spoke to Yahusha, "Why do I feel like this? What's wrong with me?" The scripture says they prayed, they did this, they meditated and they prayed. I've tried to take out all the religious words because people go, "Oh, they were praying." Kneeling at the end of their beds praying. No, prayer in scripture, in the ancient scriptures, prayer just means communicating. And you can do it anywhere, anytime, even inside your own head you can communicate with Yahusha. You should be. I hope you are. So I just made it easy. So she felt pain, so she spoke to Yahusha. "Why do I feel like this, Father? What's wrong with me?" And Yahusha comforted her, saying, "The reason there is so much pain and struggle in your body, my daughter, is because you are carrying 2 babies. And these 2 boys will become 2 mighty nations on the earth. One will be more powerful than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So don't be afraid." There's massive significance in that sentence there. The older will serve the younger, because we've touched on it with Noach's sons, about him blessing and cursing certain sons. But the whole idea of inheritance and birthright, we're going to go into that shortly. More cultural stuff for you to understand what's going on and what Yahusha is doing today as well. So remember that sentence there in the all caps. The older will serve the younger, because traditionally the oldest is the boss. He gets more inheritance, he gets more say, more authority, passes on the line from the father, he's the top dog. But what is this prophecy? What does Yahusha say to her? The older son will serve the younger. So don't be afraid. So they're kicking her, they're fighting, they're having fisticuffs inside the womb already. And she's feeling a bit nauseous, and what's going on? So he says, "It's okay, you're having twins." No doubt Ribkah would have told Yitzchak about this. If Yahusha talks to you, you'd tell me, you'd tell everybody, wouldn't you? You'd tell your husband. So no doubt Ribkah would have told Yitzchak about this. So they both would have known about Yahusha's plan regarding the firstborn son. And so would the boys too. They would have told the boys when they were older too, because it would have been a phenomenal thing. Yahusha didn't live inside them at this point. So like I was saying, not in this case. So the point of this turquoise writing here is that it's saying that everybody would have known. It wouldn't just have been a secret. Everybody would have known. And after 9 months, Ribkah gave birth to twins. Twin boys, as Yahusha said she would. The first boy came out bright red and covered with thick hair like a carpet. So Yitzchak and Ribkah called him Esau, meaning hairy, and red like a lentil bean. This is the beginning also of where names, probably earlier on, but names mean something. You didn't just get your baby names book and pick a funky name like we did today. You were either feeling something, observed something, experiencing something, or it could have even been prophetic. You believed that something was going to happen to this child, and you would name them accordingly. So your name meant something. So he came out red and hairy, so they called him Esau, which meant hairy and red like a red lentil bean. Imagine that. Why was I called Esau? Because you're a hairy red bugger, that's why. So then, holding on to his brother's heel the whole time while he was born. They're not only having fisticuffs in the womb, he's holding on to his brother's leg. "Don't you come out without me. You're not leaving me behind." He's trying to get out first. He's trying to usurp. He's trying to get out there. Yaqub came out next, holding on to his brother's heel. So Yaqub means grabbing the heel, or to deceive. So we'll see about the deceiving later on. But so can you see how the names mean something? He came out holding his brother's heel, so they called him Yaqub, which means grabbing the heel. And as the boys grew up, Esau became a cold, ruthless hunter and loved going out wild in the fields, killing anything just for the pleasure of it. So he was a bit bloodthirsty. Even if he wasn't looking for food, he just liked killing things. He was a savage. That was Esau. But his younger brother Yaqub had a much quieter, peaceful personality and enjoyed staying inside the tents, studying and writing. So he was more knowledgeable, he had more of an education, studied and knew how to write. Yitzhak loved his firstborn son Esau more because he was a rough and tumble lumberjack beast of a man. And Yitzhak looked forward to the nosh-ups, the feasts from the wild game that he brought home every day. So his father preferred Esau, who was a savage guy who brought him home yummy food all the time, baked him up food all the time that he'd hunted. But Ribkah, however, loved her younger son Yaakov more and much preferred spending time with him. He was a softer, more quieter disposition. That was his personality, his behaviour. And we can see that in our, I've got 4, now 5 boys in my family, and have I? 6. I've lost count. I've got 6 boys now, and 2 girls. So, and there's so many different personalities. And even when we'd only had a couple of boys and we knew we were having a couple more, we thought, oh, they're all going to be the same. There's no girl again. But they're never the same. So many different personalities within the same sex. So, and they're all the same. Some like going out and being wild, and some like staying in and being quiet. You can see the difference here as well. One was a lumberjack beast of a man going out there hunting and killing things, rough and tumble. And he got on with his father. And Ribkah got on with Yaakov, who was quieter, more intellectual. So then we've got this interesting little section here. And this is from the book of Jubilees that I've added here because it fits into the timeline. Abraham, who's still on the scene, this was Abraham's final instructions. Abraham took another wife, Keturah, and had sons, and also sons from concubines too. And even though this was just the culture of the time, a rich man had concubines. What is a concubine, children? Concubine is someone you're allowed to sleep with. But it's a relationship. It's not just like a prostitute, someone you pay for sex. A concubine is generally a girlfriend or a regular partner that you have. It's just the time and custom. This is just because Yahushua allowed this, though. Yahushua also allowed 3, 4, 5 multiple wives as well back then. Does that mean we do it today? Many people, many believers in Yahushua believe that polygamy, which is the belief that you are allowed to have lots of wives, they believe that because Abraham and other men had lots of wives, we can still do that today. Well, in a lot of countries it's illegal, and technically it's not illegal. Technically it is permitted by Yahushua, but one wife's hard enough, isn't it? Technically it's not. The pattern, the perfect creation was one man and one woman in the garden, wasn't it? And that's what Yahushua's bringing us back to, the garden, isn't it? So why would you do something that's not? There's plenty of things in Scripture that they are permitted to do that weren't really the ultimate, weren't really the ideal thing. And remember back then too, they're also trying to populate the earth. So, we don't sleep with our brother and sister these days either, do we? Because of the bloodlines and genetic disorders. So we do what Yahushua tells us to do, and it's one man and one woman. Not 2 men, not 2 women. One man and one woman. That's the ultimate pattern. I'm talking about patterns because Yahushua is into orders and routines and patterns, and he doesn't get into the chaos and the madness of things. So Abraham after Sarah had died, Abraham took another wife, Keturah, had more sons, and also sons from concubines too. And even though Yitzhak preferred Esau, Abraham loved Yaakov and favoured him, knowing that he would be the son who his descendants would be named after. How did he know that? And he called Ribkah, knowing she felt the same, saying to her, how did he know that Yaakov was going to be called Yisrael, and how his people going to be called Yisrael? Yahushua must have told him. So even though Yitzhak preferred Esau, Abraham loved Yaakov and favoured him as well. Not only his mother, but Abraham favoured him, knowing that he would be the son whose descendants would be named after, And he called Ribkah, knowing she felt the same, and said to her, I don't have much time left, my daughter, so please watch over Yaqub for me. For through him a mighty chosen people will arise in the midst of the nations, a treasured possession of Yahuwah, and a fulfillment of promises made way back since Shem. That the bloodline. I know that my son Yitzchak prefers Esau, but your eyes are upon Yaqub, so treat him well. Love him and rejoice in the promises regarding him. For trust me, the whole earth will be blessed through him, and his descendants will be as many as the sand on the seashore. Interesting that he says the whole earth will be blessed through him and his descendants, because that's what the tribes of Yisrael were supposed to be. It didn't happen like that, but they were supposed to be a chosen people to set an example for the whole world to see, look, if you want to be protected, if you want to be blessed, if you want Yahusha's presence, his Shekinah in your nation, follow the instructions and be obedient, be grafted into this nation. Yahusha didn't want just one nation. He didn't just want Yisrael. He wanted the whole world to come under his instructions. He wanted them to see how amazing Yisrael was. But of course, Yisrael dropped the ball. Anyway, back to the prophecy. This is what Abraham said. So, calling Yaqub to his mother's side, Abraham kissed him and said, Yaqub, my darling boy who I love, may Yahuwah bless you from above and favour you as he did Adam, Canok, Noach, and Shem. And may all the amazing things he promised me pass on to you, my son. Don't let the spirits of the wicked one rule over your family, in case they steal you from this land and destroy you. Interesting instruction, isn't it? It's telling him what's what. Let the promises of my descendants pass on to you, of my ancestors pass on to you. Don't let the wicked one take you away from the land. My son, separate yourself from the nations. Don't eat with them, and definitely don't behave like them, or even hang around them, for they are unclean, and all their ways are a pollution and an abomination. If something happened to me and I was laying on my deathbed, and I had to talk to my children, this would be very similar. Don't just separate yourself from the nations. Don't eat with them, and definitely don't behave like them. Don't behave like them. Don't be impressed by the nations. It's all a rip-off. It's all smoke screens. It's not what it seems to be. It's not who they say. No one is who they say they are. As much as they're trying to batter their eyelids and seduce you and impress you, once you see behind the veil at the wizard, it's just nothing. It's all lies. What is it? The proverb? The lips of a harlot taste like sweet honey, but afterwards it's the sting of a viper, something like that. So don't behave like the nations. Don't even hang around them, for they are unclean, and all their ways are a pollution and an abomination. They sacrifice their own children to the dead. They worship evil spirits. Sacrifice their own children to the dead, and they worship evil spirits. They eat over the graves, and all their works are vanity and nothingness. Abraham actually said this to his son. They have no heart to understand, and their eyes do not see what their behaviour really looks like to Yahuwah. This is the wisdom he gave to Yaqub. And Abraham called Ishmael. Hey, Ishmael's back. G'day, Ishmael. Ishmael's back. He's got a nation of his own now too. Remember Ishmael, the son he had before Yitzchak came along with the servant girl, Egyptian servant girl Hagar? This is Ishmael. Ishmael's back, everybody. So Abraham called Ishmael and his 12 sons, plus Yitzchak and his 2 sons, and also the 6 sons of Keturah and their sons, so basically all his sons. And he commanded them that they should observe the way of Yahusha, staying on his path of obedient behaviour, and to love each other, making sure to circumcise their sons according to the blood covenant which he had made with them, and not to stray to the right or to the left from the path which Yahusha had commanded them. Good instruction. Don't get seduced. Don't go. Don't get impressed. Wander off your path. So don't stray to the right or the left from the path which Yahushua has commanded them. He instructed them to stay away from all fornication. What's fornication? Fornication is sex, sexual intercourse, sexual behaviour, sexual deviousness, pornography these days, anything that's to do with sexuality, anything that's basically to do with sex but not between a husband and a wife, it's fornication and uncleanliness. So stay away from fornication and uncleanness. And if any woman or maid committed fornication, to burn her with fire, and not to take any wives from the daughters of Canaan. Don't take any wives from the daughters of Canaan. For the seed of Canaan would be rooted out of the land. Interesting prophecy there too. The seed of Canaan will be rooted out of the land. Doesn't happen for a long time. Till Joshua comes along. Yahushua. Joshua. So, this was the culture back then. If any maid was caught committing fornication, burn her with fire, and don't take any wives from the daughters of Canaan, for the seed of Canaan would be rooted out of the land. And he reminded them of the judgment of the giants. He reminded them about the Nephilim and how they were destroyed in the flood. And he reminded them of the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah, the fire that came from the sky and destroyed the city with Lot in. They ran away. And how they had been wiped out because of their wickedness. Who today remembers any of these things? And who today in the 21st century gives a rat's? Who cares? And that's why when the fire comes from the sky and destroys this whole planet, because of the lawlessness, we can't say we weren't warned, can we? I beg you, my sons, love Yahuwah and guard his instruction tightly in your heart. Tightly in your heart. Do not stray after the false idols of the nations and after their uncleanliness. For they're all fake. There's no power or spirit in them. Just stuck up vanity. The works of men's hands, and everyone who trusts in them actually trusts nothing. Imagine, boys, building a big Lego man. And it's very impressive. The best Lego man everybody's ever created. You sit it there, and everybody has to think about it all the time. And then we start praying to the Lego man. And then we start, offering sacrifices to the Lego man and asking the Lego man to give us a good day today. Please, Lego man, send us lots of clients today and give us lots of money. Please, Lego man, protect my children. Oh, such and such isn't feeling well today. Please, Lego man. Can you see how stupid that is? And Josiah will come along and say, well, hang on a second. I made that Lego man. What are you worshipping that for? You should be worshipping me. I'm the one who made it. This is how Yahushua feels when we're bowing down to pieces of wood, pieces of stone, silver and gold, which Yahushua created. We won't worship Yahushua. We'll worship the idol, the object. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. So Abraham's telling his children, they're all fake. There's no power or spirit in that idol. Just stuck up vanity, the work of men's hands. And everyone who trusts in them actually trusts in nothing. It's the same as religion. There's nothing, it's not real. Religion is not real. They're all standing there doing song and dance and sermons every Sunday morning. It's not real. Then they go back to their lives and it's BS. They've wasted their whole life in religion. There's nothing there. Everyone who trusts in them trusts nothing. It doesn't exist. But serve and follow Yahuwah so that he may find pleasure in your behaviour and give you favour. This is someone who knows what he's talking about, because Yahushua found pleasure in Abraham's behaviour. So let him find pleasure in your behaviour and give you favour, and send the rain upon you morning and evening, and bless all the work of your hands, giving you bread and water and the fruit of the womb, and cattle and flocks, so that you may be the envy of all the nations. And you shall all be blessed in his mighty name, as I have been. So Abraham knows what he's talking about. He's given out all his secrets. This is what I did. Continue it on, boys. Don't let that wicked one take you out of the land. And he gave gifts. He gave gifts to Ishmael and to his sons, and to the sons of Keturah, and he kissed them and sent them away. And to Yitzchak he said, My son, I am old and don't know when I'll die. I'm 175 years old, and throughout my life I have remembered Yahuwah and sought to please him with all my heart, and to walk uprightly on his path. I have absolutely hated the idols and also the behaviour of those who serve them. And I have given my whole being over to the will of him who created me. For he is the living Elohim, Yahuwah, and he is set apart and trustworthy, to judge all those who are disobedient to his instructions and despise his blood covenant, and all the words written in the book of my forefathers, and in the words of Canok, and the words of Noach. And I can see, my son, that all the works of the children of men are perverse and wickedness, and all their deeds are unclean and an abomination and a pollution, and there is no righteousness with them. So beware, in case you start behaving as they do, treading on their paths instead of Yahuwah's, and he should hide his face from you and boot you out of this promised land and wipe out your name and our descendants. Stay upright, my son, to do his will, and be upright in all things, and he will bless you in all your ways, and will raise up from you a mighty plant throughout all generations of the earth. And my name and your name will be never forgotten. My name and your name will never be forgotten. Now go in peace, my son, and may Yahuwah El Shaddai, my Elohim and your Elohim, strengthen you in all things to stay on his path. And may he bless all your children and remain in favour with all the generations of our family forever, so that we are blessed across all the earth. What a beautiful thing for a father to say to his son before he dies. Passing on the baton to a new generation. This is what I've done, my son. This is what works. I was raised as a pagan. I saw my father go through the life of paganism, and my father died, and Yahushua met me. Yahuwah met me and spoke to me and told me to come to this land that he's promised for me and my generation, my descendants. So if you want the promises to stay alive, you've got to behave. Don't let your behaviour slip. Don't let your behaviour become like those of the nations. Don't worship. Don't have a lifestyle like they do. He told everything to his son. And before he died at the good old age of 175, Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Yitzchak. Remember, he was as rich as many of the kings surrounding him. He was a king without a kingdom, but he had the promise of the whole land. And he gave everything he owned to his son Yitzchak. And having known Yahusha, what a beautiful way to express it. Who of us can say we know Yahusha? I'd like to think I can say I do. I know Yahusha. Not because I'm anything wonderful or because I've overcome, but the more you overcome, the more you know Yahusha. Since before I became a Nazarene, the part of the bride was immersed, compared to now, I feel like I know Yahusha a lot, but I'm sure it's just a drop in the ocean. The scripture says, having known Yahusha, Abraham breathed his last breath and was buried by his sons Yitzchak and Ishmael in the cave near Mamre next to his darling wife Sarah, on the promised land which he had purchased himself from the elders of Kath. So he bought the land for his wife and he was buried next to her. And despite being born into a pagan Chaldean culture, Abraham found favour in his life because of his strong belief in Yahusha's promises, and his obedient behaviour allowed him to pass through, which is what the word Hebrew means, pass through. His obedient behaviour allowed him to pass through into an eternal blood covenant of deliverance with Yahusha. Yes, this first recorded Hebrew, he was the first man ever called a Hebrew. This first recorded Hebrew, a man who spent 100 years of his life with no children, became the father of many nations. Isn't that amazing? And that's where the story of Abraham ends. It's been quite a journey going through Abraham. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Abraham and what Yahusha did through him. And he was the first man who was really established in the blood covenant of deliverance. The blood covenant that was spoken to Noah was more of a one-sided, I won't flood the earth anymore. But the same blood covenant, but the blood covenant lifted up with Abraham, which involved the shedding of human blood, the circumcision. It all came through Abraham. And he had to behave a certain way to get Yahusha's attention. He had to hear his voice and go, yes, I'll do that. Many people would have said, oh, what's this? I'm going mad, I'm hearing a voice. No, not at all. I think we've got time to go on to Esau. Esau sells his birthright. And we're going to learn a lot about the birthright in this and what the importance of birthright was in Scripture. So Esau and Jacob have grown up now. And this is overlapping the time that Abraham has died, because the whole family's in mourning. I'll explain to you why. Now, while Yitzhak and Rivkah were still mourning the death of their father Abraham, it was customary for none of the immediate family to cook or do any domestic duties. So Jacob, the grandson, began cooking a comforting stew for his parents, even though the men didn't usually cook. That's why Jacob was cooking. Usually the men didn't cook. The wives did that, and the servants and all the others, they were cooking. So why was Jacob cooking? Because during the time of mourning, none of the immediate family would cook. So Jacob decided to cook a comforting stew for his parents. But Esau couldn't care less about spending time with his family, and thinking only of himself, buggered off, went out to hunt. This is what a misery bunch I'm going out to hunt. So it's showing you their behaviours. There's a nice picture there. They would have had much blacker skin than that, but their skin is starting to get slightly lighter through the ages, but it still wouldn't have been white. But that's just showing you the difference. One was a mighty hunter with red hair. Apparently he had red hair. And one was not a hunter. He was in the tents. So here's an interesting thing I read too, which I've added. It has been recorded that this was the day that Esau ambushed Nimrod. Some believe Shem killed Nimrod. Others, based on the book, what book was it? It doesn't say here. Didn't write it down. I think it was Jubilees. Either Jubilees or Yasha. Says that it was recorded that this was the day that Esau ambushed Nimrod while he was hunting with his men, and he cut off his head during the battle. So he killed Nimrod. Esau killed Nimrod. So Esau actually returned home not just tired, but completely war-torn and bruised from combat. He hadn't just been out hunting. He'd been in battle. He'd been in full-on combat. So he came back war-torn, clothes ripped and tattered, and he was just exhausted, almost on his deathbed apparently. He was just completely war-torn and injured and everything like that. And later that day, Esau came home completely exhausted and caught the wafting smell of the delicious lentil stew that Jacob was making. And his stomach grumbled within him. Give me some of your red stew. I'm completely knackered and starving and can't be bothered making my own. That's how brothers talk to each other, isn't it? Give me some of your stew. Give me some of your stew. Can't be bothered making my own. And Jacob snapped back wittingly, starving enough to trade me your birthright, brother? Starving enough to trade me your birthright, brother? What? Esau said. And Jacob thought it would be a good time to manipulate what Yahusha had told his mother years before. What had Yahusha told his mother years before? That the older brother would serve the younger brother. Well, the older brother can't serve the younger brother if the older brother has the birthright. And every eldest child possessed the birthright. What is a birthright? We're going to go into it soon. But the birthright was obviously enough that Yaakov wanted to trade. If you want some of my soup, some of my stew, you give me your birthright. Esau said, what? Yaakov said, your birthright and all its promises. Give it to me. You know it's going to be mine anyway. And Esau saw red. He was furious. I'm absolutely dying of hunger here and you want to talk about my stupid birthright? I don't need a damn birthright if I'm dead, do I? I won't need a damn birthright if I'm dead, will I? And Yaakov said, promise me right now and I'll give you some of my stew. Esau also knew what Yahusha had promised his mother about the birthright. He just didn't care. He was hungry. So he didn't care about Yahusha's promises. He didn't care about Yahusha's voice. He didn't care about what Yahusha had said to his mother about him serving his younger brother. They would have all known about it. He didn't care. He was hungry. He was thinking about his stomach. That's it. Pleasures of the flesh. Thinking about his gut. So he didn't care. He was hungry. And Esau gave Yaakov his promise and sold over all his rights of authority to rule his father's clans. That's what the birthright was. The authority to rule over his father's clans after his father died. Something only the firstborn son could inherit after his father's death. So part of the birthright was that you had the authority, you were the boss, over all your father's household. Servants, wives, possessions, everything. You were the boss over it after your father died. That's what the birthright was, and that was passed down to the oldest son. So he agreed, he sold it over. Then Yaakov fed him bread and red lentil stew, and Esau ate and drank and was completely satisfied. Then he stood up and left, thinking nothing of it, for the future promises of his birthright, and in this case the eternal blood covenant too, passing down from Abraham to Yitzchak and to him, meant absolutely nothing to him. Isn't it interesting that Abraham said this would happen, and also Yahusha said this would happen to Ribkah while they were in her womb. The older will serve the younger. And Abraham backed it up too, saying that's why he loved Yaakov so much, because he knew this was going to happen. He saw their behaviours already. Promises of Yahusha and the blood covenant passing down from generation to generation, from Abraham to Yitzchak and now to him, meant absolutely nothing to him. He actually had contempt and hatred for it because he lived only for the moment. Just wanted to go out and have fun with his mates, wanted to go out hunting, didn't care about Yahusha, didn't care about the Shabbat, didn't care about anything. He wanted what he wanted now. He was hungry, so I don't care, I'll just tell you whatever you need to hear so I can stuff myself. And from then on, Esau was actually called Edom, which means red, after this stew incident. Ancestor to the future Edomites. So in the scripture, when you read about the Edomites, they were the ancestors of Edom, which was Esau. A little tidbit of information there for you. And another famine struck the land, similar to the one back in Abraham's day. So Yitzchak, knowing of the royal food supplies, decided to move his family to Egypt. What? Didn't this all happen to Abraham? He lost his belief for a minute there and ran off to Egypt. Now his son, Yitzchak's going to do the same thing. He knew about the royal food supplies in Egypt, so he decided to move his family to Egypt. But he'd only travelled as far as Gerar, where the Abimelech, king of the future Philistines, lived, before Yahusha appeared to him, saying, I want you to stay in the land I promised you, here, and do not go down to Egypt, as your father did, for I am giving all these lands to you and your family, and I will bless you and lift up my eternal blood covenant of deliverance with you here, as I did with your father Abraham before you. Your descendants will be as many as the stars in the sky, and through you every nation of the earth will be abundant. I'm offering this promise to you as I did to your father, because he obeyed my voice and guarded my instructions. So stop running away, trust me, and stay put. This is the land you're supposed to stay in. So Yitzchak stayed and lived in Gerar, where the dangerous pagan people had no fear or respect of Yahusha. And after a while, the men started asking about his wife Ribkah, because remember, she was very beautiful. So Yitzchak told them that she was his sister. Oh, deja vu. Thinking to himself, my wife is gorgeous and the town folk will definitely kill me just to have her for themselves. This is what Abraham went through with his beautiful wife Sarah. Deja vu. But one day, after they had lived there a while, the Abimelech, king of Gerar, looked through a window and saw Yitzchak kissing and cuddling Rivkah, and went and said to him, hey, it's obvious this woman is your wife, so why did you lie to us and say she's your sister? And Yitzchak said, because I was afraid someone would kill me just to have her for themselves. And the Abimelech was angry. Why have you done this to us? Someone could have very well gone and slept with your wife and brought all that guilt upon us. So the Abimelech commanded all his people, saying, anyone who lays a hand on this man or his wife will be put to death. Yitzchak had just like Abraham, had a reputation. Prince of Elohim. So they were afraid to go lay a hand on him because of the protection and things that happened around them. Later that year, Yitzchak planted a crop and Yahusha blessed it, producing a huge harvest for him. And over time, Yitzchak's family and wealth and possessions of herds and flocks and servants grew and grew and grew, greater and larger, as Yahusha had promised, until even the Philistines surrounding him, which were the people of Gerar at this point, were jealous and began to envy and despise him. They even began they went around and filled in all their wells of water. These wells that had been dug out by Abraham's servants. Until the Abimelech finally told Yitzchak to get out of their land, for he was threatened by how large and powerful Yitzchak's family had become. So Yahusha was blessing his family, not only in wealth and possessions, but in people as well, becoming a threat to the nation they were in. Sound familiar? This is what happened with the Pharaoh years and years later. So he kicked him out, kicked Yitzchak and his family out of Gerar. So Yitzchak moved further over to the Wadi Gerar and immediately began redigging all the wells of his father, which had been filled in after his death. And he lived there for some time, calling the wells by the same names his father Abraham had called them. But every well they seemed to dig brought more strife with the local Gerar people, who fought over the ownership of each well. There was drama and fisticuffs happening left, right and centre. Yitzchak dug a well and they argued again. He dug another and the conflict continued. This happened over and over and over until Yitzchak's servants finally managed to dig a well and no one complained. Finally, no one complained or argued over it. So Yitzchak rested happily and rejoiced, knowing that Yahusha had made room for them to live and increase on the land for the time being. Because if you couldn't find a well to settle in around, that you had to live where the well was, because the well was your livelihood. You can't live without water. So the fact that they'd finally dug a well and no one was arguing with them or trying to fight them over it was, to him, Yahusha saying, good work, settle down. No one's fighting you over this. You could stay put here for a while. So from there, Yitzchak travelled up to Beersheba, where his father had lived. And Yahusha appeared to him that same night, saying, I am Yahuwah Elohim, mighty one of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you always, and will bless you and increase your family even more, as I promised your father Abraham, who behaved obediently and walked with me. That's a phenomenal promise, isn't it? And after this phenomenal experience with his creator, Yitzchak built a small platform out of stones, here's your altar again, to honour Yahusha. And they also dug out another well, settling down in that territory for a long time. Then, the Abimelech, king of Gerar, travelled to meet Yitzchak, bringing his chief commander with him. And Yitzchak was frustrated. Why on earth are you here? You already kicked us out of your land and obviously hate us. What have I done now? And the Abimelech said, we can all see that your Elohim, mighty one, is with you and has blessed you in every way. So please make a covenant agreement with us that you will treat us fairly and be honest with us, and do not do any evil to our nation, and we will do the same for you. We sent you away in peace, Yitzchak. Yes. We sent you away in peace, Yitzchak, not hatred. And look, now you are blessed even more by your Elohim. So he doesn't actually want to be friends with Yitzchak. He's just afraid that if Yitzchak gets a thorn in his side, he'll come and attack him, because Yitzchak's nation is now bigger than his city. And they feasted together and swore an oath to do right by each other. And then they left in peace. So they cut a covenant with each other and left in peace. On that same day, Yitzchak's servants told him they'd found water again. So they called the well Sheba, which means oath. And that place is still called Bar-Sheba, well of the oath, to this day. So even though we've been hearing about Bar-Sheba for chapters and chapters and videos now, this is where they actually called it Bar-Sheba. Bar-Sheba, well of the oath, to this day. This is where it got named. And Yitzchak's son Esau was living a rebellious lifestyle. So he didn't care. Didn't care about his father, didn't care about his mother, his covenant, the blood covenant, didn't care. Couldn't give a rat's, mate. Esau was living a rebellious lifestyle outside of his father's covenant, which upset his parents very much. He had no interest in the promises or instructions of Yahusha, and at 40 years old, he married 2 local pagan Hittite women. What were they told specifically not to do? Do not marry women from the local Canaanite women, because they're idolatrous harlots, they're whores, mate. And the bloodlines are tampered with. It's a cursed bloodline of Ham, the Canaanites. Anyway, he married 2 local pagan Hittite women, Yehudith and Basemath, who were not from the clean Hebrew bloodline. Something Abraham had insisted Eliezer never do when finding a wife for Yitzchak. Even made him put his hand on his willy to promise it. Do not go to those women. Go to my family. He made a blood promise with him. Insisted Eliezer never do and find a wife for Yitzchak, but to stay within the clean bloodline of his relatives, so that the blood covenant would pass from generation to generation. The clean bloodline had to pass from generation to generation. And this is the section I was telling you about before, about the blood, the firstborn. Because I want you to understand this, because it comes up later. I'll take that up to the top. Every firstborn son received both the birthright and the blessings. I didn't even know the difference between this before I studied it. I'd heard about the birthright, and that's what I knew. There's 2 different things that the firstborn son gets. He gets the birthright, because he was the firstborn, and he gets the blessing also. Every firstborn son receives both the birthright and the blessing. It was an inheritance with 2 parts. So what's the difference? Have a look over here. The birthright, and we'll read down here. The birthright, this was the authority to rule as the head over the whole family and any clans after the father dies. So this was the authority to rule. The birthright was the authority, and the blessing, each child, because after the father died, his wealth was divided amongst all his children. Each child received some of the father's wealth. However, after he died, however, the oldest got a double portion. So every child, the wealth was divided up amongst all the father's children after he died, but the oldest child got double. Does that make sense? So that was the blessing. So there's the birthright and the blessing. I want you to remember that. It's important to recognize, because Yaakov traded his brother. He got his brother's birthright. Remember? Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of stew. That's how little his birthright meant to him. And look what the birthright is. The authority to rule all his father's clans after his father dies. He traded that for a bowl of stew. So Yaakov had attained himself. I mean, Yahusha promised and told their mother, Ribkah, that this was going to happen. But Yaakov didn't have to take matters into his own hands and do it. Yahushua would have done it himself. But this is the sort of person we're going to see that Yaqub was. Real stealthful and deceitful and, conniving and wrestling and, fighting for everything he gets. So he'd already wrestled with his brother and got the birthright off him. Kind of scammed his brother from that. He knew his brother was hurt and upset and exhausted from battle, so he took advantage of it and said, well, if you want some of my stew, give me your birthright. And he did. So he's already got the birthright. Now we're going to see how he gets the blessing. Yitzhak gives the firstborn blessing. You know what? So, now that you understand that, we're going to leave it there, guys, because in our next episode, we're going to see how Yaqub, who already has the birthright, is now going to scam his way into the blessing as well. He'd already scammed his older brother for the birthright, to be the El Supremo and the ruler of his father's clans, but now he's going to scam his way into his father's blessing as well. And this is all prophesied by Yahushua, but what Yahushua said and what Yaqub does are two totally different things. He actually takes and attains what Yahushua says would happen, but he does it his own way. Lies and cheats his way into it. So, and we'll go into that next episode, guys. Stay strong. I hope this is helping you understand the culture that we're not only living in today, but how they did it back then. I mean, it's phenomenal to go into the blood covenant and see how important the blood was, and how Esau had no regard for the blood covenant. That's the world we live in today, isn't it? They don't care about the blood covenant. We're trying to train our children to understand the blood covenant, to understand the covenant that we live in, the everlasting marriage covenant. Yahushua's love, his instructions that we live by. We're sealed with his name on our forehead, and we're doing the sign of the everlasting covenant with is the Shabbat. So, because I want to see what Yahushua's going to do next. This earth, this world is destined for destruction. Could be any day, any year now. Any year. It's completely days of Noach out there. Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'll tell you what, the minute the sun goes dark and that moon starts glowing red, oh, woohoo, finally this is over. This hideous torture and torment of a life is over. The only joy you can find in this life. It's not out there. Get as much money as you can get. It's not out there. The more money you get, the more everything starts to cost for you, because the lust of the flesh is insatiable. The only pleasure you get in this existence is Yahushua's instructions, Yahushua's love, Yahushua's ruach inside us. So put your eyes there, brothers and sisters. I love you, and stay tuned for more exciting episodes coming up. Bye-bye.